John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was born in 1892 in Bloemfontein in South Africa to English parents, Arthur and Mabel. His father, Arthur, had been transferred there in his bank job, but after they were there for a few years, Mabel decided to bring the two boys home because Tolkien had a brother called Hilary, and they were very young, and she returned home with them, and their father was to follow back to England a year later, but he died in South Africa of rheumatic fever. So the boys were now being brought up by their mother alone. But when Tolkien himself was 12 years of age, she became a diabetic and passed away. So both the boys became orphans at that early time. Because of their mother's wishes, Father Francis Morgan became their guardian. He was a Catholic priest, and the boys were moved from relative to boarding house to relative for about the next 10 years of their, or not 10 years, but the next 6 years of their life. In 1911, Tolkien went to Oxford University because at a very early age he had shown extremely good linguistic skills, and he quickly mastered Latin and Greek by the time he was 12, and he soon was into languages like the Finnish and the Gothic. And at Oxford, he passed with honours in 1915 in English literature and English language and literature. When he was 16 years of age, he met a young lady who was 3 years older than him in the boarding house that he and his brother were staying in, or his brother and he. And her name was Edith Bratt. Now, although she was 3 years older than Tolkien, they soon created a bond of affection, and about a year later they declared their love for each other. But when Father Francis found out about Tolkien having a relationship with a Protestant girl, of all things, because he was a Catholic, he forbade Tolkien to continue the relationship and not even have correspondence with her until he had finished all his studies and turned 21. The day he turned 21, he packed up his things and went straight to her place and professed his love and asked her to marry him. And 3 years later, they were actually married in 1916. Now, in 1915, Tolkien enlisted in the British Army because of World War I. And 2 months after they were married in 1916, he went to war in France and he actually saw action at the Battle of the Somme. An interesting part of this is, while he was on the Somme, he saw muddy land, dead trees, no vegetation, pits full of muddy water, and just basically a blasted land where nothing would grow. And he always thought that spring would never come to this land. And this description of the warlands in France would later become his description of Mordor in The Lord of the Rings. So throughout his life, experiences do come into the Lord of the Rings story. There's another tale. When he was young, in his teens, he went to Switzerland on a hiking tour and in the Swiss Alps. And of course that became the inspiration for his Misty Mountains and Rivendell. Now, after the war, he got a job at the Leeds University as an associate professor. And then a few years later, he returned to Oxford as a professor, and he was the professor for Anglo-Saxon English, which was Old English. And then later in his career, he became the professor of English language and literature at Oxford. He and his wife had 4 children. There was John, Christopher, I've forgotten the other boy's name, embarrassing. Priscilla was the youngest. And he used to write children's stories for his children. One of the most famous is the Father Christmas letters, which is beautifully illustrated by Tolkien himself. And he used to write them a letter every Christmas from Father Christmas. After his death in 1976, the book was published, well, the letters were published as a illustrated book. Well, when Tolkien was very young, he was not only good at languages, but he also started experimenting by writing his own languages. And he was influenced by Welsh, Finnish, Gothic, and he started creating his own different Elvish languages and dwarf languages, and even had alphabets for them, written alphabets. He used Gothic runes to influence his runes for his dwarf alphabet, and he created quite a lot of languages for his stories of Middle-earth.